Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. We're just going to give another minute for everyone to start logging on, and we will start the presentation in about a minute. Please feel free to write in the chat where you're located. I'm currently in New York City. It's very snowy here, one of the first snowfalls of the year. So please feel free to use the right hand of the chat under the messages, and you can feel free to let us know where you're located. New York too, awesome. Oh, Rhode Island. It looks like we're all in a freeze here. Awesome.
Yeah, international as always, Ashley, looking good.
Yeah. I wonder if it's a freeze over in Germany and Italy. What about the UK? It's very cold here. About negative 10 Celsius right now in New York. All right, perfect. So we will start. So hello, everyone. My name is Ashley. I am from Qualio, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to this exciting virtual event, Beyond Compliance, Unlocking Therapeutic Quality Excellence. This is the kickoff to the start of the event for an incredible 3-day experience, and we could not be more excited.
Thank you, Ashley. And hi, everybody. I'm Jan Kugel from Qualistory, and we are also excited to start the year with this GXP quality event packed with informative topics. Over the next 3 days, we have expert speakers, interactive roundtables, and valuable insights planned just for you. So feel free to attend as many events as you like and share this event also with your colleagues, because the registration will stay open throughout the event, so you can jump into any session that interests you.
Yes, and this event was co-sponsored with Qualio and Qualistry. Qualistry helps pharma professionals stay up to date while connecting them with top experts and service providers worldwide, as you can see in the chat right here. In conjunction with Qualio and Qualistry, Qualistry offers complimentary knowledge-packed webinars to ensure that pharma professionals stay informed about the latest industry trends, regulations, and innovation solutions. This event would not be possible without Jan, thank you very much, and the Qualistry team.
Thank you very much, Ashley. So back the same to you, to the amazing Qualio team. So wherever you are, our dear audience, grab your virtual seat and get ready for a deep dive into the world of therapeutic quality excellence. So thank you for joining us and enjoy this event. And Ashley, take it from here to start today's first session.
Thank you, Jan. So we will get started. So like I said, my name is Ashley, and welcome to the first session. This session is Applying ICH Q8 in an Outsourced Operation. And this webinar is part of our 3-day event. So we're very glad that you're joining us this morning, this evening, whatever time zone you're in. So I'm here today with Raz and Molly, who will be your subject matter experts and speakers today. This session will be recorded, and I will be your moderator for today's session. You will receive a follow-up email in the next couple of days with resources and this recording. And if you do not, please feel free to reach out to Qualio in the next couple of days. So we're glad you're here. On the right-hand side of your screen, just a few little housekeeping things before we begin. You'll see options, which it seems like everyone is already starting to engage with our speakers. So you can please feel free to go ahead and introduce yourselves and other audience members. We absolutely encourage you to ask your host questions along the way. So send those questions to the Q&A section that we'll be looking at throughout the presentation, so they do not get lost in the chat box. We will be doing our best to answer the relevant questions throughout the presentation, as well as leave time at the end of the session. And again, this will be recorded. So now let's get to our session. Your hosts today are Raz and Molly. Raz is an independent consultant to companies in drug development. He is a biotechnology engineer and has a Master of Science in Molecular Biology. He's hugely experienced in all stages of CMC development and regulatory affairs, from proof of concept studies to market application, biologicals, gene therapies, and many more. Molly sits with the Qualio Plus team, and she is a part of industry experts who supports our EQMS customers with their regulatory and quality challenges. Molly has over 8 years of deep quality management knowledge from the pharmaceutical, medical device, and laboratory fields. Molly is particularly experienced with the FDA, HPRA, MDSAP, and ISO 485 audits, and is here today to lend her own perspective on how you can bake quality by design in your information and knowledge streams. So today's agenda, an ICH 8Q, and we'll talk about today is the ICH 8Q and the science-based risk approach, the fragment of knowledge during the years of drug development and outsourced operations, and ways to mitigate knowledge loss and harness its full potential. So please let us know right now in the chat box, like what side of the outsourcing pie are you? Are you a sponsor, service provider, consultant, other? This will help us guide our presentation based on the audience today. And lastly, who is Qualio? This event is brought to you by Qualio, and we are an all-in-one EQMS enabling therapeutic, all-in-one EQMS enabling therapeutic teams to bring life-saving products to market. So with that being said, let's get to the topic on hand, and over to you, Raz.
Okay. Yeah, can you hear me? Hi.
Yes, we can hear you. You are good.
All right, thanks, Ashley. I'm just trying to have a quick look here at the answers. We have some people from Lanza, consultants. Nice. Okay, so hi, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. So just to sort of give a brief title for today's discussion. So we're actually not only today's discussion, this entire event is revolving around the modern regulatory framework that's given to us by ICH Q8, Q9, Q10. And we oftentimes hear of the science-based and risk-based approach. And what we're going to do today is focus more on the science part, which is the substance of ICH Q8, which is titled Pharmaceutical Development. So we will see specifically how ICH applies to the situation of outsourcing. That's why we asked the preliminary question of where are you in this pie? Because the situation for many startups is that many of their operations, especially manufacturing at early stages, are outsourced. So we will see how to apply the principles of ICH Q8 and the pharmaceutical development into this very specific situation. We will focus on CMC aspects, so of manufacturing drugs at a consistently high quality. And of course, these principles apply also to clinical development, but those are enough for other talks by themselves. So just to give us a brief sort of overview of ICH Q8 and science and risk. So ICH Q8, as I said, deals with pharmaceutical development, and it outlines the principles of quality by design. Basically, it tells us that the ultimate goal of pharmaceutical development, of manufacturing process development, is to consistently deliver a safe and effective product, okay? And it talks about what is quality of a product and how we define it. So the main premise of ICH Q8 is that quality cannot be tested into the product. It should be built by design, contrary to what we had in the earlier years of the industry, where we had sort of quality by testing. So we relied heavily on final testing of our product. As products became more complex and more advanced and have with many more features, namely biological products, gene therapies, cell therapies, the industry soon realized that it cannot be only relied on final testing, and really quality should be built by design, and we will see what it means throughout today's discussion. So quality by design, in essence, is based on scientific understanding of product variability. So we want to understand exactly how the process influences our product and how it introduces variability into our product, which is inevitable, especially, as I said, with the more complex products. And it also ties in quality risk management, which is the substance of ICHQ9, which we will not talk so much about today, but it is basically our understanding of risk and what really matters and where to focus our attention, which guides our way through product development and pharmaceutical development as a whole. So in other words, we have so in other words, this is the science-based and risk-based approach that's given to us, as I said, in ICHQ8, which we'll talk about today. ICHQ9 speaks of the risk-based approach, and they both come nicely together under the pharmaceutical quality system, which is depicted in ICHQ10, which I believe is also the next speakers in these events are coming up, so they will elaborate on these two guidelines. Okay, let's quickly see here. Okay, if there are any questions, Ashley, you will just drop me a line, right?
Absolutely. I'll let you know as soon as we get our first question. So just keep going, and then I'll stop you once we get those.
Okay, good. So before we jump specifically into our into ICHQ8 and into topics that are specific to drug development, I wanted to bring sort of the general picture of the scientific method as a whole. Okay, so drug development is a science; it's an applied science. So we have a specific application in hand, but the same principles hold also for pure science and for scientific endeavor as a whole. So the cycle, generally speaking, goes, if we start with prior knowledge, okay? So this is basically the body of all the current knowledge that we have, our current understanding of the world, of the situation, or whatever it is, whatever realm we're dealing with. We always start with some body of knowledge and understanding. Now, from that background, we usually make a hypothesis, or we ask ourselves questions. And in order to, and those questions are sometimes just for the sake of better understanding the world. Again, pure science could be endeavor for just additional knowledge for the sake of knowledge. But with applied sciences, we usually have a specific end in mind. So we are looking for an answer to solve a specific problem. And in order to solve that problem, we run experiments. Okay, so experiments have, they follow a very rigorous scientific method. They are controlled. They should be hopefully repeatable. Okay, so we are doing things with an intent to prove the hypothesis or to answer the question. By doing so, we generate data. Okay, so this is the next step of the cycle. We do measurements, we run observations, we generate data, and then with all this data in hand, we analyze the data and we reach, hopefully, to conclusions. Okay, so we basically create knowledge. I will just mention in brief, and I have a slide on this, but we have a hierarchy of data turning into information, turning into knowledge, and then into wisdom. So we will speak about this in a second, but basically, if we follow the cycle, we reach the point where we better understand our world. Okay, we have new knowledge, and this new knowledge enters the pool of where we started with the prior knowledge. Now it's our current knowledge, and the cycle continues. Okay, so we always evolve, we always learn more, and we will see this throughout development. So how does this come to play in drug development? So of course we have the clinical development aspect, which is the most prominent. Usually people speak of finding new, safe, and effective drugs. So with clinical development, we have some drug with very little knowledge about it. Okay, so our prior knowledge is limited, and we ask ourselves, is this drug safe and effective? We want to find out. So we run our experiments. These are the clinical trials. As I said, they are controlled. They follow a very rigorous method. We collect the data from these trials, and we reach some conclusions. Hence, for example, this drug is safe, as it seems, depending on the phase we're at. We can draw some conclusions, and we materialize those conclusions into clinical trial reports, into regulatory submissions, And these, again, enter into our body of available knowledge. Same with CMC development. Okay, so with developing a manufacturing process, this goes in parallel to clinical development. So we basically want to know how to deliver this new drug consistently in the right quality to the patients. Okay, so once again, we sometimes run deliberate experiments in CMC development. We will see this in a second. We have manufacturing process development runs. We use different scientific methods and tools to collect this data correctly. We, of course, have actual manufacturing data. We will see that as well. So we collect more and more manufacturing experience. And these all turn into our eventual process design and specifications, which serve us in the commercial process. Okay, so we will get to this specifically in a second, but just one more word of sort of introductions. As I mentioned, the DIKW hierarchy. Okay, that's an important concept in knowledge management and science as a whole. So basically, as I said, we have data that turns into information. So when we collect our data with some metadata and context, it becomes information. Information collectively, when applied, is our knowledge, and wisdom is our way to effectively apply this knowledge in our day-to-day situation to respond to real life, basically. And ICHQ8 actually tells us that the level of knowledge gained and not the volume of data provides the basis. So the basis for science-based submissions and the regulatory evaluation. So they tell us, listen, it's not enough just to generate data. You really have to squeeze this lemon as much as you can, and you can create knowledge, not necessarily in direct proportion to the amount of data. Okay, so it's not necessarily a pyramid. So I turned it upside down here just to make the point that sometimes we can do a lot with our data, and this is especially important when we speak again of an outsourced situation, where, as we will see, it's pretty hard to collect all this data and keep it together. Okay, so again, so this was just very generally speaking, the context of our discussion. It applies to CMC development as well as clinical development. But I wanted us to really look more specifically into CMC development with the introduction of the CMC development mountain. So I will go over it very quickly. It is actually a full week of my course, so this is a very ambitious climb here, but we'll just briefly give you a flavor of it. So basically, when we climb the CMC development mountain, our target is to reach a commercial process. As I said, ICHQ8 tells us that a commercial process must consistently deliver a product of quality to the market. Okay, so we would manufacture day in and day out, and we want our product to consistently be of the same quality. Now, when we start, okay, remember our prior knowledge at this sense, when we just start the journey, so to speak, we have our initial process. It could be a generic process to make proteins. It could be some platform technology from our CMO, but we must develop it to be suitable for our own product. Okay, so we run specific process development experiments. We have small scale runs. We usually increase the scale up to the first GMP scale, and we have an initial process running. This process would serve us for the early clinical supply. And throughout those years, and it could be several years when we're in early clinical development, we have inevitably different process changes that we introduce. We do tech transfers, so we switch to other CMOs. We run many times comparability studies, which compare the material before and after any change that we introduce. So all these events basically create a lot of data. Okay, so we learn a lot, even if it's not deliberate experiments that, as I mentioned before, we are creating and generating a lot of data, which, as I said, can be turned into knowledge. And these are very important milestones that we will, in a moment, connect together with our scientific endeavor. Now, after we've run this through several years of development, we enter phase 3 clinical trials, which are the last clinical stop before we actually approach for marketing approval. This is where we usually want to have our process at sort of a very high level of maturity, okay? Preferably exactly the same as would be the commercial process. We would basically want to base all our clinical evidence in a scientifically sound manner on this material, okay? So phase 3 really must be a very stable process. But still, we continue to learn when we prepare for process validation. We do some deliberate studies, again, to characterize the process further, okay, to understand its variability. We will see this in a second. And then we are ready to do process validation, which is the final effort in proving that our process is indeed consistently delivering the right quality. And once we complete that, we can sort of reach the top of the mountain and say that we have a commercial process. Hopefully, the regulatory authorities would agree with us that indeed this is the right process, and then we would get approval. It doesn't end there, okay? So we continuously improve our product, our process, also when we are in the commercial years, okay? And again, these are things that are reflected in ICH Q8 and Q10, very clearly say that we must enable this continual improvement. We must remain in a valid state, okay? So we had continuous process verification. So basically, we always ensure that our product remains in a validated state. And again, connecting us back to the scientific method, we're basically continuing to generate more and more data to better establish our knowledge and wisdom. So just to complete the slide, but I'm not going to drill into this. So basically, we spoke of manufacturing process development. Our product also goes through several permutations, okay? So we have pharmaceutical development. So basically, the way we deliver our product also changes throughout those years, and again, gives us many opportunities to learn more and more about our product. And of course, as I said, we have clinical development going in parallel, which maybe in this point, it's important to mention that it teaches us a lot about what is critical in our product. Okay, so we will get to this in a second, but we really want to understand the quality attributes that would impact the clinical outcome, and those are things that we learn throughout the years of clinical development.
Raz, it looks like we do have a question. Yes. So okay. I will share this in regards to the CMC development. How much ICH 8Q, Q8 and drug development steps would be necessary if you aim to manufacture an open source formulation drug that already exists on the market? And I just shared that
open source. Okay, so let me read this for myself. How much ICH Q8 and drug development steps would be necessary if you aim to manufacture an open source formulation drug already existing in the market? Okay, so open source, I assume that you mean, so basically, if I understand the question correctly, we're talking about doing a generic drug or copying a drug that is already in the market. Eventually, the responsibility to deliver a safe and effective drug lies in the hand of someone who is making those drugs. Okay, so if I want to sell a pharmaceutical product, it doesn't matter if it's something that is my own innovation or if I'm just mimicking another drug in the market. It is my ultimate responsibility to ensure the safety and the safety first of the patients that are getting it. And of course, the efficacy, okay, which many times goes with safety. So if I'm making a drug for blood pressure and something is not consistently at the right quality, I'm putting patients at risk. And of course, if my safety is not in line, then I might also risk the patients from other directions. So eventually, it doesn't matter whether it's open source or I've never heard open source in this regard, but I'm using the words. It doesn't really matter. We are developing the process to the high levels of pharmaceutical products, because at the end of the road, the patient will get there to the pharmacy, will buy the drug, and will assume automatically that this drug is safe and effective. We actually, we don't even think about it. When we when we take a drug, we don't think of the possibility that this might hurt us, and we take it almost for granted. But in the background, there is a very elaborate system of ensuring that this is the right case, and the regulatory authorities will definitely look at all your development data and make sure that you know what to do. So I hope this answers. We'll read the question again just to make sure.
Thank you, Raz.
Okay. Good. So just to summarize this slide, basically, as I said, as we progress throughout the years of clinical development, we collect more knowledge. Okay, we start with very little knowledge about making the product. Okay, and again, just to connect us to the question, at very early stage, we don't know very well how to make this drug. So there could be very high variability, both in terms of how effective it would be, and also in some safety aspects. And that's why when we are early on, we are not getting approval to distribute it in large amounts. We only get approval very early on just to test it in animals. Then we get approval just to test it in very small groups of people in phase 1 studies. So it's a stepwise approach where we gradually increase our understanding also of how to make this drug consistently well. Okay, so we increase the level of knowledge, and when we reach the market, we are expected to show in-depth knowledge of our process, and this is what we'll learn how to do when we apply ICH Q8, Q9, Q10. Okay, so I just want to give you a bit of flavoring, and again, this is just a flavor, and also the guideline is only giving the top level of this. But what we do in process characterization, okay, again, just to remind you, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but our last step before we approach the authorities is to characterize the process and validate it. And when we do this process characterization, first we start with a lot of prior knowledge, okay? So we have been manufacturing this drug for several years now, so we already understand it quite well. But the intention is to, again, to consistently deliver a product of quality, and we start this by defining what it is that we want. Okay, so what is the QTPP, the quality target product profile? Okay, so we basically define exactly what the patient needs to get in order to be safe and effective. And from there, we derive our critical quality attributes, okay? So what we do in process characterization is basically understand what influences the output of our process. So what inputs in our process, what CMAs, critical material attributes, CPPs, you can see this here in the diagram, what inputs of material attributes, what inputs of process parameters, and how noise impacts our process, such that the CQAs, the outputs, remain within some boundary that we define in advance. Okay, so this is based on small-scale deliberate studies. We do design of experiments. We use statistical tools to understand this variability. Of course, we have the large-scale data that I mentioned. Okay, so we both generate data in large scale, for example, for impurity clearance, and we have also process intermediates that we collect and we study them in separate. So we do deliberate efforts to better understand our process variability in order to reach what we call a design space. Okay, so again, this is just very briefly. I know. I hope this is not doesn't sound like hand waving, but basically, a design space is our understanding of the limits around each of the process parameters or material attributes that are acceptable. Okay, so let's read ICH-Q8's definition. The design space is the multidimensional combination interaction of input variables. Okay, so the material attributes and process parameters I mentioned that have been demonstrated, i.e. scientifically proven, to provide assurance of quality. Okay, so basically this definition of a design space tells us that we operate within a predefined range of attributes that is proven to be acceptable. Okay, and I couldn't help it but put some pictures here, but for those of you who want to really understand what they mean, go to ICH-Q8, scroll all the way to the end, and they explain very nicely what these basically multi-dimensional landscapes mean. Okay, so they basically are the connection between several different parameters and material attributes. Okay, so let's put this.
Looks like we have another question right from the slide before. So please. It's how do I find my CQAs?
Okay. Okay, that's a good question. So the CQAs, as I mentioned, are a derivative of our target product profile. Okay, so we must define exactly what it is what this product is supposed to do. Okay, so if it's a product for for blood pressure, or if it's for a specific patient population, there is a set of attributes that would ensure that this product does what it's supposed to do. Okay, it derives from its biological activity. Of course, the safety is also part of what's critical. Okay, so safe and effective goes hand in hand. So if it's a sterile product, obviously it must be sterile. So basically, we must understand exactly what's the fate of this product in the clinical setting, and define what subset of critical attributes would have a direct impact on the safety and efficacy. And for those attributes, we assign the word critical. Okay, and again, it's not necessarily a binary. Okay, so this goes also to ICH-Q9, but basically criticality is a ladder. Okay, so there are things that are more critical than others, but in essence, we define our critical quality attributes as our focal points for product quality. And we need to do that because, as I said, especially for biological products, but not only, we have literally infinite amounts of potential attributes that we can test and measure. So we really have to focus our attention into those that are deemed critical. And then we go back and test the material attributes and process parameters. And again, for those that have an impact on the CQA, we would assign this criticality. So the material attributes that are affecting CQAs, we would call them critical. And for the process parameters that impact CQAs, we would call also critical. Okay, and yes, so it starts with the end in mind. It starts with understanding how this product is supposed to work. We also see this throughout clinical development. So we learn things about our product over the years that reveal to us new critical quality attributes that we weren't aware of at the onset. Okay, so we learn of this new impurity, for example, that might have an impact, and so on. But just to finish the answer, some critical quality attributes are known to us from day zero. Some obvious ones, okay, like the potency of our products, the safety, sterility, as I mentioned, and things that are, again, our prior knowledge. Okay, so prior knowledge plays a critical role, and we are today in a situation, in a position that we know a lot about drugs, and we know a lot about different modalities. So we can start the journey with quite a bit of understanding of what it is that we need to take care of. Okay, so it's not like we're running blindly for many years without any critical quality attributes.
Awesome. And we actually have another question on this, if you could potentially answer. I hope it's, at what stage are proven parameters?
Yes. So I assume that this goes to this slide, maybe the proven acceptable ranges or proven parameters for the process. Again, we are obliged to a specific manufacturing process when we submit the final submission for approval. Okay, so it's the top of the mountain where we actually commit to a very strict set of parameters. And since that point, making any changes becomes much more difficult. Okay, and that's where the value of quality by design comes, because we in that point, we already introduced quite a bit of flexibility around the parameters that we understand best. Okay, so our intention is to not give a too narrow range because we simply don't know. So let's say I run my process, I have a pump that runs at 5 liters per second or whatever, then I don't want to be very strict on that process parameter, because operationally speaking, when I do commercial manufacturing, there are some fluctuations. So I would want to provide a relatively flexible range wherever possible. And that's what I'm going to do when I collect more and more data over the years. Now, I cannot, and before I submit the process, okay, during the years of clinical development, it's less strict. Okay, so I'm not obliged. So they're not let's say set in stone, but there is the question of comparability. So when I make changes to my process at each stage of development, I always need to ask myself, does this somehow change the safety and efficacy of my product? Mainly safety, but at some point also efficacy, because I always rely on the previous step. Okay, so if I do phase 1 material and I make a very significant change to one of the process parameters, and it might have an impact on the quality of phase 2 material, then I would have to stop and show comparability, and the regulators might stop me as well. Okay? Hope it answers.
Yes, we'll continue on. We have some more questions, but we'll wait for a few more minutes while you get through the other couple slides.
Okay, so I'll try to speed up because I don't want to take also Molly's time.
Yep.
Okay,
so 12 minutes left.
Oh, okay. So just to quickly summarize this part, basically, we saw throughout my talk so far several points where we are basically getting scientific knowledge and their scientific events, so to speak, during drug development. So we spoke of prior knowledge with other similar products, okay? So generic processes and platform technologies. By the way, this is a major selling point for CDMOs. So CDMOs, if a CDMO is expert in making a specific product modality, then they have a lot of prior knowledge already from their other products. We run experiments, deliberate experiments. Again, I mentioned this as a friction point with CDMOs. I'm not going to go into this, but basically, the sponsors are the ones paying for it. Okay, and okay, so it's a big topic. I'm not going to go into it now. And as I mentioned, we have many additional sources of non-experimental data that are an opportunity for improvement. Okay, so every time we run a process, every time we introduce a change, we do tech transfers, comparability studies, all these changes teach us something about the product, about the process, and we should have it in mind when we try to collect these things together into our process understanding. And that's okay. And we will speak a little bit more about this in the last part, but I want to pass on the mic to Molly to help us understand how all this knowledge is sort of dispersed all throughout, all over the place. So Molly, the stage is yours. I'll pass the slide.
Thanks, Rose. So in this next section, we're going to explore how outsourcing drug development work can lead to knowledge about your product becoming fragmented and inaccessible at the times when we need it. So if you move on to the next slide, it's kind of a busy slide, but this slide really goes through the division of knowledge amongst all the different players in the drug development landscape, and really how that knowledge can end up in silos. So to start with, when we talk about a virtual company, a startup pharma company, this slide looks really at the extreme end of the spectrum of how knowledge and data is siloed. This example is more likely to be true in small companies that are surrounded by outsourced operations, but this can also happen in larger companies where there might be one or two processes outsourced, or where each different department kind of becomes their own silo of knowledge. So the same principles of that knowledge being fractured applied. So in the center, we have our virtual company, and the most significant relationship that virtual company has is with their CDMO, so their contract development and manufacturing organization. They're going to they're going to develop the drug, develop the manufacturing process, and then actually manufacture the drug. So there's a lot of information that flows between those two parties, and that information is quite critical for the virtual company to have access to. You also have consultants. They can be integral parts of a company, sometimes as team members, sometimes as, let's say, fractional heads of departments, and they can develop their own personal knowledge of certain aspects of your product. There's service labs. They may do analytical testing. Sometimes they might even do the method development. They could carry out stability testing, characterization assays, and you could have multiple labs in use. And then if you look to the right, we have regulators. They absorb all the information and the complexity of the product, and they give you approval to move to clinical trials and then hopefully onto the market. And then finally, on the left, we have the investors. They need to know a certain level of information about your product to decide on whether they're going to invest or not, really. They want to see what you know about your product, how well you can sell it to them with the information you have. And the more knowledge you can provide, the more valuable your company is. So those are basically the streams of knowledge, right? In terms of how that knowledge is captured in each one of those relationships, with the CDMO, a lot of times it's in development, manufacturing documents. The CDMO will have a QMS, and sometimes, if the virtual company is a small company, the CDMO's QMS is the only QMS that is actually in play at that time. The CDMO might have other systems such as like ERPs, knowledge management systems, LIMS, manufacturing execution systems, lots of other systems that maybe aren't part of the QMS, but they still, like Roz said, they hold a lot of data and information, knowledge about the whole manufacturing process. Again, critical for the virtual company to have access to. So in the labs, we have protocols, reports, certificates of analysis. With the investors, before we've before an investment round, we create due diligence documents so that we can present that information, that product knowledge, to the investors. And then finally, we have regulatory files that capture all the information about our product that's relevant for the virtual company and the regulators. And then there also might be knowledge captured in a relationship that we're not privy to. So the regulators will be auditing the CDMOs. There will be audit reports, audit findings, and sometimes, if that CDMO is working for multiple companies, we might not have access to that information, that knowledge. So all these documents that are created, let's say these big milestones, such as like regulatory submissions, when you're doing due diligence, document creation, tech transfer, those become the closest thing to a single source of truth for this virtual company. There's specific systems at this stage that this virtual company can use for knowledge management, content management, which is fine, but they often then can't be used later on to manage quality systems. So eventually, those two systems are going to have to marry up, your knowledge management and your quality management, when you're required to have a fully functioning pharmaceutical quality system. And since this knowledge is largely captured in documents, an EQMS then becomes the best candidate for bringing all that knowledge together in one place for the virtual company. So if we move on to the next slide,
Molly, we actually have a question that I can share now. So we have, would the virtual company need to utilize the EQMS to capture the CDMO related deviation, changes, and kappa? Molly or Raz, could either of you answer that question?
Yeah, well, sometimes in some situations you'd have the CDMO, providing seats into the EQMS so that the virtual company could have visibility over that. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's just a case that the CDMO is, exporting documents, having the virtual company approve them, and then putting them into the, back into their QMS, right? So I'm just reading this question, make sure I answer it. I suppose there would be, you would outline this in your agreement that you have with the CDMO of what specific things they need to notify you of, how often or how soon they need to notify you, and what capacity, via email or whatever. I hope that answers the question. I don't know, Roz, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, actually, I'll add it in my last slide, and I'll point exactly to that. Okay.
Perfect. All right, continue on, Molly.
Oh, okay. So just in this slide, we're just going to look at, the relationship between knowledge and risk. So knowledge management and risk management, quality risk management, they do have an interdependent relationship. That's actually an inverse relationship, let's say. So the more availability of knowledge means decreased risk, and then inversely, decreased knowledge of a process increases the risk during the development life cycle. So let's say you have a quality investigation that you need to conduct and you don't have access to all the knowledge you need about that process or that issue. It's going to be very difficult to accurately, assess the impact that issue has, put in place effective corrective actions, because you're essentially starting off on a back foot in terms of having a clear understanding of the issue of the process. So that lack of knowledge really increases the risk to your product, can extend timelines, etc. So that's why it's important to have management practices, knowledge management practices in place right from the early start as you develop your product. And like we said, ICHQ9, quality risk management, knowledge management, what they will combine to do is enable the creation of a pharmaceutical quality system that you will be required to have as part of ICHQ10. This will facilitate your objectives of product realization, establishing and maintaining a state of control around your processes, and then providing a way to continuously improve by allowing you to make scientific and risk-based decisions about the quality of your product.
And it looks like we do have another question. It's a little bit of a long one. Oops, I just lost it. I'm sorry. Oh, here it is. You mentioned that the EQMS is the best way to improve knowledge management. Since documents are the main way to store organizational knowledge, what best practice could you recommend for storing or managing documents in a way that optimizes knowledge management?
Okay, well, I guess to start off, just making sure you have, an effective document management process in place is the first thing. Read that just to make sure I'm answering it correctly. I guess accessibility would be one thing, making sure that, that document is accessible. With EQMSs, a lot of times they're, rather than having it as an on-site server, an EQMS that is managed in the cloud allows people to access it at different sites. Like I said, you could provide seats to other people in other organizations if you need to. So you can control the access to those documents. I suppose accessibility in terms of the content that's in it, just making sure that it's, if you have control over the creation of any of that documentation, that, it's written in plain text, that you're avoiding really long text-heavy documents, and that you're considering your audience. So not everyone has the same, technical understanding if you're using lots of technical terms and everything. Some people do better with visual things like photos. So if your EQMS allows you to, edit documents and put in photos or links to other types of media, that can help. I suppose in terms of that document management policy or procedure, having that in place and just making sure, reviews and approvals are done by the appropriate people to make sure that the content, is of good quality too. So if you're, keeping records in your EQMS, that those records you followed, the Alcoa Plus principles, so that it's attributable, legible, contemporaneous, so that you're ensuring when you have to access that knowledge that it's of high quality, there's data integrity that's been applied to it, and that it allows you to then to go use that knowledge easily.
Great. Thank you,
I
Molly.
hope that answers the question.
I think so, yeah. And just a heads up, we have just only a few minutes. I know we have a couple of slides left. So if we want to speed up those last ones, then we can get to a few last questions. So just giving you a heads up.
And I'll hand it back over to Raz now.
All right, thanks, Molly. So yeah, maybe the questions were very good and the answers. So maybe this also brings us to the right point of maybe just to summarize the tips and best practices. I don't know if you guys are getting the slides or just the recording. You can read through those quietly afterwards. And of course, if there are any additional questions, I'm always happy to meet you guys and engage. But maybe just to give a high-level answer to all this is to and also relates to the EQMS questions, is to keep things sort of cohesive. Okay, so Molly showed how knowledge is fragmented all over the place. So we have our CDMO holding part of the picture, and our service labs and our consultants. And when we try to really apply all this knowledge together and tie it down into our scientific understanding of the process, the main thing to do is to find ways to sort of bring it all under the same roof. And this is the main challenge here. Okay, so the EQMS and other practices are ways to basically bring this into the same system. So let's quickly look at some tips and tricks, okay? But as I said, I'll just very quickly run through it so that we have some time for questions if there are. So as I said, we want to own the big picture of CMC development, okay? So we want someone to sort of see the entire thing, because especially with outsourced operations, sometimes we only outsource a very narrow aspect of our situation, and we want someone to have this in mind. And implementing knowledge management practices in-house really helps. Okay, so it starts with maintaining single sources of truth. Molly relate to that. This could be any QMS, it could be any other knowledge management system. I mentioned living documents as a very important tool. Okay, so we can treat our regulatory files as living documents. So it's not only when we submit that we should look into them. We can also have them updated as we go along. Of course, we can run cross-functional communities of practice to sort of bring together people from different players, from the service labs, the consultants, the CDMOs, under the same roof, and really collect all this knowledge and understanding. In-source your knowledge is something that I always say when we outsource operations. Okay, so we want to try and shadow as much of the explicit knowledge. Okay, so that relates to the question about do we need to have the EQMS of our supplier in-house? In essence, no, we don't have to have proper QMS if we are not operating under GXP, but it is a very good idea, because if we treat it as a source of knowledge, everything that goes on, then at least having access to those documents can become very valuable when we try to improve our process and situation. We always need to be on a hunt to find tacit knowledge or things that are not explicit in the documents. Replace oversight with engagement. Okay, so really treat your providers as your team, okay, and try to have them all under the same roof. Leverage the supplier's prior knowledge. Okay, that's very important. Okay, CDMOs are an invaluable partner because they see a lot of projects that are potentially very similar to your own. So leverage on that knowledge and try to use it as much as you can. Digital transformation is an important one, and it's substance for an entire lecture, but I'll just mention it in brief that we really want to think of the very near digital future of all the activities that we're talking about. Documents are no longer going to be serving us, so we really have to focus on what digital transformation means for our industry, Pharma 4.0, moving into fair data. Fair is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Okay, so all these are paradigms that are very important to get to know of and move towards them. As service providers, also, there are some tips and tricks, but I'll really skip them for now. Sorry about that. Just to allow, let me see if there is something I really have to say. Knowledge management practices are just as important for service providers. Lead the way in digital transformation if your clients don't. Okay, again, those are going to be tomorrow's selling points as more companies understand that knowledge is the real token here, and this is what the entire industry is about: gaining more knowledge, then finding ways to capture this knowledge and properly apply it would be differentiators for service providers and service receivers just the same. Okay, so just to summarize this talk, we basically saw that ICH-Q8 lies the foundation of the science-based approach. Knowledge management is a key aspect in bringing together our understanding and really applying this knowledge into wisdom. And in outsourced operation, this could be very challenging because everything is fragmented, and we really must look for ways to do cohesive knowledge management and bring together everything under the same roof in order to squeeze as much of this as possible and do the best with our data. So we still have a couple of minutes, right, for questions?
Yes, just a couple of minutes. And just as everyone's watching, we do have another session in 30 minutes. It's a roundtable, so if we don't get to your questions right now, Raz will be in the next session 30 minutes from now about bringing your therapeutic quality challenges. So please feel free to join that session. But it looks like we can answer one now, which is, do we have any recommended storage period for docs related to product development, or QBD?
Oh, wow. Very good question. I would say that in the electronic, okay, so I'm assuming electronic, okay, because really if we're talking about papers, then it's going to be, it is already almost impossible to use them properly, okay? So when I'm speaking of digital transformation, I want to assume that we're talking about electronic data, and then it becomes, my answer would be to keep them for as long as the project is alive. Now, ICH Q10 also speaks of the life cycle management, which includes product discontinuation. But again, when we zoom out a little bit and we think about this as an industry and as scientists as a whole, I think that really throwing data to the garbage is not helpful in any way. So if you're a CMO and you have projects that are long after their the period that you don't have to maintain their data, this data can still be valuable to future projects. Okay, so recommended period, I would say, for as long as you're in the business, try to keep this data. Of course, there are other considerations like regulatory considerations and IP and legal repercussions of all this. So take this with a grain of salt. But I'm in the side that it's usually not my problem. So I'm free to say whatever I want.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Raz. We don't have any more time for questions, but thank you all for attending today. It does bring us to the end of our first session. So we have two more, one starting in 30 minutes, the round table like I just mentioned. So thank you so much, Ramali and Raz, for your fantastic, informative webinar today, and our sponsors, and just kind of committing to going beyond compliance with us. As a reminder, this session will be recorded. You will receive a follow-up email in the next couple of days, and you'll get the recording, you'll get the slide deck. And if you do not, please feel free to reach out to us. Additionally, you will receive a certificate after the end of today. So please feel free to share that with us on social media, on LinkedIn, tag Qualio and Qualistry. And lastly, we love feedback. So please feel free to fill out this survey that just pops up on your screen before you exit the session. But other than that, we'll see you all in 30 minutes at the roundtable discussion. And thank you so much, everyone, for your time. And thank you again, Molly and Raz.
Right. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Rose. Thanks, Ashley.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.